Hi everyone, my name is Georgia Campbell and I am a consultant speech and language therapist.
Hi, my name is Allison O'Brien and I am a consultant speech and language therapist.
And today, Allison and I are going to chat about supporting children with autism spectrum conditions at home. So what you can do at home. So Allison, how do we support children with autism spectrum conditions at home?
Well, I think the first thing we need to think about when we're thinking about these children are certainly using visuals and the importance of that. Getting them using visuals to understand, language and simple instructions.
Yeah, and I think depending on the age or kind of where the child's at, you can use all kinds of different visuals. So we use objects of reference to show key events. So if it's time to go outside, you might show the child their shoes, or you might show car keys if you're driving somewhere.
And especially with, routine events that happen throughout the day, like you said, maybe like bath time, bedtime, maybe show pajamas for bedtime, towel for bath time.
Yeah, and I think for objects of reference, the important thing is that everybody uses the same one to represent the same event, and that you pair it with a word, a single word that's always the same.
Yeah. And I guess the importance of not using lots of language, as you said, single word, always using the same word and not lots of other language around it, and getting everyone to use the same word.
Yeah, I think bringing language levels down in general is probably something that we see a lot of when we're working with children and families, that families might use lots and lots of words to talk to a child, when actually if you bring that down with lots of pausing in between, that's going to help that child process the instruction and also help them learn language more easily.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's actually very simple in principle, but it's actually quite a difficult thing to do. So that could be the first goal if you're seeing a child for intervention, to work on that with the family. That could take quite a while to implement.
Yeah, I think we often don't really hear ourselves talk, do we? And especially with children, when we really want them to talk, we tend to overload with language, which has the opposite effect.
I've found that sometimes getting families to record themselves at various points throughout the day, communicating with the child, just to see, how they're getting on and monitoring themselves, is quite effective. And often they're quite surprised. They think that they're simplifying their language, and they're not, or they find it quite difficult.
Yeah.
So that's a nice thing.
Yeah, and it's quite overwhelming. I mean, if you don't understand, it's quite overwhelming for the child, and that will kind of have the opposite effect. It will make them shut down because it seems too hard.
Yes, exactly.
If we're talking about visuals, also talking about using visuals to understand what's happening around you is really helpful. So a visual schedule for what's happening in your day is going to help that child feel secure in knowing what's kind of coming next and what's happening for that day.
Yeah. I guess using things like a now and next board as well is really useful, within maybe moments throughout the day that aren't necessarily scheduled into the child's day. So if something's difficult, maybe you can do, so for example, if the child is having a bit of a meltdown, they're not really, they're not having a good day, they're not happy with what's happening, you could maybe lead them on to something that they might enjoy or that's motivating for them with a now and next. So something like now bubbles or their favorite toy, and then next we'll do the task that we're trying to do, or next we'll go out. So now bubbles, next car, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with transitions, isn't it, to really think about if you're also the other way, if you're transitioning for something that you love, so if you're transitioning from kind of playing in the sandpit and the next transition is to kind of go inside and sit down, which is something you don't like to do, then it might be helpful to have like a bridging activity. So sandpit, then bubbles, then sit down.
Yeah. Absolutely. And just how important it is to show the child using a picture or whatever level they're on, whether it's a symbolic picture, whether it's a photograph of the item or the event, whether it's written for older children.
And I think if we reflect on our own experiences, how stressful we would find it if we didn't know what was happening during our day or our week. It's quite destabilizing, and so we need to think about it's the same for children, and it needs to be in a format that they can understand.
Yeah. And I guess it's the importance of assessing that understanding before we implement any of these things in the child's home.
Yeah, so that we know that it's relevant, meaningful, and useful.
Yeah, exactly. And that, of course, that the parent's able to use it, and that they're, it's important that they're really well trained and understand exactly what they're doing.
Yes, and I think things like timers as well is useful in this case, because often we might say to children, there's something that you want, you can have it later. And then that child, later is such an abstract concept, you might not understand. Whereas if you kind of have a timer and you can say, when the timer runs out, you can have this thing, or when the timer runs out, this is finished, then that's also going to be a lot easier for that child to manage. It just makes it concrete.
I was just going to say concrete, and that they can see exactly when they're able to have the thing.
Yeah.
Once the sand timer finishes. Yeah, it's very concrete, it's very visual, it's very simple.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes parents will say to me, like, but I've said yes, but it's not now, it's later. And for me, I think, okay, for that child, basically that's the same as saying no, because they don't comprehend what's happening later.
Yeah.
It's too much of a difficult abstract concept for a little kid.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I was thinking of visuals for things like explaining in a bit more detail things that are happening in the world. So I know with especially what's happening at the moment with Corona, there's lots of social stories out there explaining why things are different, why we're in lockdown, etc. But social stories are a really useful way to explain hidden social rules, or to explain expectations that are more accessible. Yes, absolutely. Have you come across any really nice social stories during the whole pandemic for smaller children? Yeah, there's a few going around, particularly around, there's a lot of anxiety around coronavirus for all of us, and there's a lot of anxiety around for children as well. There are some really kind of nice, simple ones explaining about why we need to do the things that we're doing that are also reassuring. Yeah. That's a really nice idea. And I think it's having these available for parents and accessible to them to use with children at home. I think especially if children maybe are used to going into nursery or preschool or a creche, it's good to be able to have those tools to explain maybe why they're not going into school today, or going on the bus today, or the things that they normally do. Yeah, and why you can't see your friends, or have play dates. Your teacher. Exactly. Yeah. And I think this routine is such an important part of a child of that age, and particularly if they have autism. So it's a whole, it's going to be a very difficult time for them, and they need as many kind of supports as they can from us as therapists and adults and teachers and parents, to try to make it as easy as possible for them. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, one of our key takeaways, I guess, overall is think visual, as many visual supports as possible. But like you said, Allison, earlier, just making sure that they're pitched at the right level so that they can be understood. Yeah. And that they're relevant. And I think, absolutely. And I think in using those visuals as well is to keep your language really simple, really consistent, and everyone working on the same page. Yeah, exactly. Using the same things. I think that kind of brings us on nicely to the part where we want to talk about sort of recognizing and validating emotions in children and young people with autism, and young people generally, but about how we make sure that we are providing emotional support, that we are teaching kind of positive emotional expression, teaching emotional vocabulary from an early age.
Yeah.
I think one of the really simple things that you can do, or that everyone can do, is that labeling a child's emotion and reflecting it back to them to kind of validate, so that if you've got a child that's really frustrated and they're frustrated, you can look at them and make a frustrated face and say, you're frustrated, yes, it's frustrating, you're feeling frustrated, something like that.
I think as you said, it validates how they're feeling. We all feel frustrated, but we can understand why, what we're feeling and why we're feeling it. But for these children, it's more difficult. So I think for us to validate and say, yeah, that's an emotion, that's what it is, that's fine, to let them feel like that.
And I don't know if you find this, Alison, but I find when I see children, a lot of the time, so we might work on something like the zones of regulation, which is a really great program looking at emotions, but and looking at regulation. But a lot of the children I see, they want to be happy, or they feel like being happy is the right answer, and it's kind of what we want. So a lot of children won't want to identify, I'm feeling sad or angry. They'll say, I'm happy, I'm fine, I'm calm, I'm in the green zone.
Yeah.
When it's kind of clear that they're not.
I think exactly. And I think coming from that, what we need to do, and particularly at home, what parents and caregivers need to do is model that, or in the child's everyday. So if they feel frustrated themselves, they can make a face, label the emotion, so that the child understands that it's everybody, it's not just them, and it's okay, as you said, not to always feel happy.
Yeah, I think that's really a big one, like normalizing kind of emotional expression. So being able to say, oh, I'm feeling a bit sad today, or I'm feeling a bit tired today. There is a line there of, then we don't want that child to feel responsible for your emotions. So you should finish that by, I'm feeling sad today, so I'm going to talk to my friend and I'll feel better. So making sure that there's put in the process and the solution for that.
And I think doing that as well will help with their kind of solution, or when they're feeling angry or frustrated. It's okay, but there's something I can do about this to make me feel better.
Yes, and I find things like, if I get a child coming into clinic, often we'll get children identifying feeling tired, I think, because that might be something they've heard a lot themselves. If they're kind of having a tantrum, people will say, well, you're just tired, or they're tired. So they might come in, say, to clinic for a session and be like, I'm feeling tired. So I'll always say, oh, are you? And then I'll say, I'm feeling tired too. Oh yeah, we're both feeling really tired. Shall we then just take it really easy? Should we just have a really, we'll be really slow today. And then I just find having that process of recognizing it pulls that child out of it. Whereas in the past, in my younger clinician days, I might have said, no, you're not tired. Let's come on, we're going to go and do this thing. And actually it's much more effective. And it's obviously much better for the child emotionally to do it the other way. Yeah.
To not feel like they're kind of dismissed, I suppose, even if they're not feeling tired, to again, recognize, validate, share.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I think another simple thing is, if a child does name their emotion, is validating that as well. So, thank you for telling me how you're feeling. Let's do X or Y about it.
Yeah, that's a nice one, actually. That's one I will definitely use.
Yeah, it's really, I find it really helpful. I had a little boy the other day tell me he was bored. And I was like, thank you for telling me how you feel. Now we can let's do something different because you've told me you're feeling bored, so let's change. He was so happy.
And it's encouraging them to, you know, to say how they're feeling in future to everybody. You know, it's not just to their family or to other children, it's also to, you know, to teachers and therapists and other adults in their lives too.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose we haven't talked about supporting expressive language.
Yeah, so I suppose with some of these children, you know, I guess it depends again what level they're on, if they're verbal or if they're non-verbal. If they're verbal, it's maybe working on their kind of single words, building on one word expression to two words. Again, maybe using visuals and communication boards. I find choice boards are quite nice, especially for those children that are maybe just using some single words for kind of motivating things. Choice boards are nice for meal times and things like that for parents to use.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when we say AAC, it's alternative and augmentative communication. So it's not just for children with no words, but you might have a greater vocabulary using pictures, and that gives you better choice making. You know, like you were saying, you might have a few words, but if you have access to pictures at mealtime, you might be able to make more choices then.
Exactly. And I do find with these children, I pretty much always end up using some kind of communication board, whether they're verbal or non-verbal, because it's, you know, it just really helps support their vocabulary development as well.
Yeah, because then we kind of, you know, we move on from choice boards into things like colourful semantics, where we use visuals to build up sentence structure, but, you know, they're part of the same progression, and it's about we use those visual supports to help a child communicate and make choices, but it also builds their language.
Absolutely, yeah. And I suppose for the non-verbal children, I know PECS is used, you know, in some situations when children, for certain children that it works with, and for families that I know a lot of families that really like using things like PECS, and then some who really don't, who prefer more natural forms of communication.
Yeah.
What do you find with that, Georgia?
Yes, I feel like we, I don't use PECS as much anymore as I used to, but I still do sometimes. It definitely has its place, but it's not kind of for every child. And I do think more like choice boards or kind of core vocabulary boards, chat now boards, those kind of things where you spend a lot of time modeling, coming up kind of more and more. Yeah, and signing. A lot of children kind of naturally take to signing, which is always good.
Gesture.
I find I'm using quite a lot of Makaton these days. So yeah, Makaton keyword sign.
Yeah. I think really it's using an approach, you know, a total communication approach, where you have to see how the child gets on with these things. Every child is really different. Some of them, visuals, they take to them straight away. They can point to the pictures. They can exchange the picture. And some will just go down the verbal route a lot more quickly as well. So I guess it's looking at the individual child as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, like a total communication approach, you don't have to pick one. You know, you can use as much support as possible, give that child the best chance. And that's giving them both input and output options, I suppose. And
I guess natural communication is using all those things as well. We use gesture, we use body language, we use verbal.
We use pictures and signs and symbols. Do you want to talk a bit about play, Allison?
What's that?
About play. One of the things we see a lot generally is that working with families on following their child's lead in play. So, you know, you might get a situation where you're, say, building a train track with a child, and you're focused on building the track as like the right way to play, and that child is interested in exploring the train. And so if you're there playing with the truck and they're playing with the train, you're not following their interest. Their interest is the train. So kind of following and joining in on that child's interest rather than you being the one who directs the play sometimes is a difficult shift for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important to follow the child's lead because, their attention, apart from being motivated, their attention is going to be focused on what they're doing, as you said, and what they enjoy doing. And if you join into that, you're going to get that joint attention a lot more easily than if you don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it'll be more fun for the child. Like, play should be fun. And so we want to do something that is fun for them.
Yeah.
And like you said, then it develops your attention and develops your attention to other people, develop your social understanding of somebody else. It's the same with peers, when we're playing with peers, if we're kind of supporting a child to play with peers, we really want to make sure that they're playing with something that's of that child's interest.
Yeah.
And bringing someone else in.
I think otherwise, yeah, and it's a lot easier to learn for all of us if we have something that's accessible to us and that we are interested in. So we're trying to set up the best situation for that child's thing as well, their language learning, their social rules learning,
yeah,
all those sorts of things.
Absolutely. Do we want to say something about sensory needs, Allison?
I suppose, I was just thinking of, the children, so say younger children with autism at home, how important it is to work really closely with OT, look at their sensory needs, and so that parents understand, and we can then facilitate using our communication methods for children to be able to, get their sensory needs met.
Yeah.
So I guess, even using visuals for, if they wanted to bounce, if they wanted to go outside, if they wanted a drink, if they needed to jump, their trampoline. It's just, I suppose, just being aware of those things at home and ensuring that parents have the transactional supports in place at home to be able to get the child to get their needs met in that way.
Absolutely. And I suppose from our perspective, what we would be looking at doing is obviously working closely with OT, number one, but then what we would be doing is trying to help that child communicate for those needs so that they become kind of more independent in getting them met. So even if they're at school or they're not with their parents, they can say, okay, I need a break, I need a bounce, or I need a hug, or I need to run around in whatever form that takes, whether it's picture or spoken or
So again, it's such a huge part of communication. They feel like they're able to ask for those things.
Definitely. Okay. Well, what do you think, Allison? Got any more points for children with autism being supported at home?
I think we've touched on all of the points. I think, the main point to take away is lots of visuals, very, very simple language. Making sure the child is able to communicate in whatever way possible, and all of the things that they want to communicate throughout the day.
Yeah, and I think tuning into that child, so looking at how do they understand and communicate, and how can you meet that? Yeah. How can you validate their emotions? How can you follow their lead in play? So that's kind of the other side of it as well. Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, Allison.
Thank you, Georgia.
See you soon.
See you soon.